And despite all the rumors that are floating, we are not having this because we have terrible children. Our first grade is not horrible. Not perfect, but not horrible. The reason we did it, we thought, we've been doing a lot of thinking of, how can, as a school, we can be more helpful to parents. And very truthfully, there's so much coming at parents with the internet, all of the technology. And sometimes, even I as principal, I'm like, oh my gosh, what should we do or what shouldn't we do? And so we really thought we would start having, working with the primary, intermediate, junior high. We thought we'd start with the primary. And what our goal is to have this meeting, and we were hoping even for a bigger crowd, because we thought you get to know each other a little bit deeper, not superficially. Because what brought this on, when we first started the school, we had 20 kids. So you had 40 parents. And we were so close, And then as you grow, you don't have that closeness. But Jenny and I, we were thinking of all the different things that we did. And we'd have meetings, and we'd have what we would call fun nights. And we want to do that. But, with a whole school with 400, you can't have a fun night. It'd be so disorganized or anything. But we thought we'd have these meetings. I think we have 2 planned. And then after the meetings, if we want to continue, we'll do things just to continue, to be a support, that we would have then what we would call a fun night for primary, where we'll supply the chicken and people could bring in a covered dish, bring your favorite game, and just from 6 to 8 or 5 to 7, we'd work it out with the families. And so that you kind of know each other a little bit better. And then our goal really is, this is the end of the 2nd quarter. End of the 3rd quarter, we want to do intermediate. And then end of the last quarter, we want to do junior high. And then pick it up again next year. So that's really what our goal is, besides all the nonsense that's going around. So we have no one targeted or saying anyone has bad parenting or anything. It's just an age of, I think, and especially Christians, I think we have to be in together for so many things that we say, no, our children are not going to follow this trend. And it's so much easier if, a group of parents say, no, you're not going to do this, than one parent saying no, and 5 others are doing it. You know what I'm saying? So that's basically what we're doing. And then Ron is a life coach. And so he has a lot of ideas. So he said, well, let's use his expertise, because it's wonderful, it's a gift. And he's so willing to do it. And so this is how this whole thing came to be. And then Jeannie being the counselor here, we had a meeting specifically for, it was for kids that are stressed. Then we thought, well, let's not deal with issues. Let's just, just take sections. So we welcome you, and you're brave, and you will be the ones to help plan some of the stuff that we do in the future. So thank you so much for coming. Okay, we turn it over to Ron.
First of all, before we get started, just want to kind of do a quick little quieting exercise. So if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, that's fine. And just kind of take a couple deep breaths, and all the stuff that's gone on today up until you got here, just kind of exhale out and just let that go. And all the stuff that you have to take care of once you leave here, let's just put that on the back burner for a little bit, and just really be present here for the next hour, and just be attentive and be open to whatever message it is that you're here to receive. All right, thanks. And again, like Sister Anna said, I just want to acknowledge you all for being here tonight and taking time out of your busy schedules. And I know your kids don't always show that they appreciate these things but just remember they do notice this stuff and they do appreciate it. Again, as Sister Anna mentioned, we're just trying to come together as a community and work together and support each other. And it's not about judging people as good parents or bad parents. It's just a matter of, hey, this is where we're at in society. Here's some things to think about in order to continue to grow as parents. And as far as confidentiality, we want you to talk about what you learned tonight with your spouse, with your friends, and everybody else. But one thing we'd ask as a courtesy to each other is just don't use the names. Just say, here's the situation, here's what we learned, here's, what do you think about this? So, and again, that just kind of helps, especially when you move forward with people sharing more. And the more people share, the more we all grow from it. So just kind of keep that in mind. So what we're going to do tonight is, got a little presentation for you. The screen's not the best. Our technology didn't quite work out for being compatible with my Mac, and my other one has a little bit of condensation in there from being in the car, so we'll see how we can do with that. But after that, we'll have a little question and answer period. So on the table there's some index cards and some pens. So if I'm in the middle of doing something and a question pops in your mind, just feel free to write it down, and that way you don't have to worry about forgetting about it at the end. As Sister said, Chitra and I, we have 2 kids. Vikram's in 5th grade. Come on in. Oh, you're fine. There's 2 right there too. So Vikram's in 5th grade and Asha's in 2nd grade. And a lot of people, when they ask me what I do, I say I'm a life coach, and they're like, okay, what's that mean? So what I focus on is basically being a family and parenting coach. And what I do is I help parents who are stuck or confused with how to raise happy kids in a society that is just so technology driven. And not to mention the increased workload on parents these days. To be able to help them to create a new family lifestyle that will enable them to raise happy and well-adjusted kids who will be successful in whatever they do. Now I remember back in, I guess it was my early 20s, I was still at home in college and sitting around a dinner table with my mom and dad. And I don't remember what the actual conversation was, but apparently I wasn't too engaged in the conversation. And my dad just looked at me and goes, "What the hell's wrong with you?" And I just said to him, "I'm not happy." And it wasn't about being happy about the Reds or their lack of winning or the weather, but I wasn't happy with me. And I wasn't happy with life. And by the look on their face, it was just like I kicked them in the stomach. Because they felt bad and because they didn't know what to do. And again, it's not judging the good as bad parents, because they were great parents. I mean, my dad raised 8 kids on very meager income, and I still don't know how they did it. So part of my motivation as being a family and parenting coach is so that other parents don't have to hear those words at that depth that my parents had to hear from me. So if you want a happier household with less bickering, or you're tired of the kids pushing your buttons, or if you just feel that technology is just way too much dominant in your house, or maybe something's missing and you just don't know what it is. Well, you're in the right place, because what I'm going to share with you tonight is some awareness so that you can make some changes, so that you become more confident as a parent, which will create a more peaceful person in yourself and a more peaceful household. A coaching friend of mine I was talking with a few weeks ago, he shared a story with me. He said, "Yeah, I do this shaving thing. When he shaves in the morning, he's got this weird habit of his left hand follows his right hand all the time. And then one day he said his little boy comes trucking in with his step stool, plops it down in front of the sink, gets up on there, grabs the toothpaste of all things, and starts smearing the toothpaste on his face, and takes the tube and starts shaving, but he starts doing with his left hand too. And at first he's like, "Oh, that's cool, my little boy, he's following in my footsteps." And he noticed, he's like, "Wow, he's doing that little goofy little thing with his left hand like I do." And then all of a sudden he had his aha moment. He's like, if he can pick up on that, something that I never taught him, never showed him, what else is he picking up on that I'm teaching him without even being aware of it. And what I like to refer to is story time. When I hear story time, for whatever reason, the image that comes to my mind is back at the library at St. Margaret Mary School. We're all on the floor, and the librarian's sitting on a chair reading Bible stories to us. And we're all enthralled and just soaking this stuff up. Well, the fact is that we all have a story. We all are storytellers. There's a story that we tell ourselves. Maybe we're not smart enough, we're not this enough, or we are creative, or whatever it is. There's a story we tell ourselves. And there's also a story that we tell our kids through our actions and our words. And I remember last year, Vikram had gotten his Iowa Basic test back. And he did extremely well, and we were very proud of him. And so I was sitting there with him, and I just gave it to him, and just to see what his reaction was. So he's looking at it, and he didn't have a whole lot to say. And I was like, well, Vikram, you got a 99 percentile in math. He goes, yeah, Dad, but I didn't get 100. And I was just like, oh my God, why is he so hard on himself? And I was like, okay, so I obviously explained how the Iowa Basic stuff worked, but then I had my aha moment. He's hard on himself because that's what I do. That's the story I was telling him. Because whenever I'd mess up, I'd get mad at myself. And I'd be hard on myself, and it's like, oh man, what did I just teach him? And so for me, that was something that, I never liked making mistakes. And I remember a friend of mine, I guess I was in the mid-20s, I had a little fender bender. And I only had a little tiny scratch in my car, the other car wasn't damaged, but I'm sitting there telling him, I was doing this, and I came around, and I was describing the whole situation. I was like, I don't know where this car came from. And he just laughed at me, he goes, you just don't like messing up. And I was like, that's probably pretty true. But that's not the story I want to tell my kids. Because making mistakes is part of the journey. But it's just a matter of, when you make those mistakes, to be able to learn from them. So at that moment, when he said that, yeah, but I didn't get 100, I had a choice. I had a choice to continue beating myself up, expecting to be the perfect parent, or I could use it as an opportunity to grow personally and also to be able to teach him a different lesson, to be able to rewrite my story that I tell him. Because that's the cool thing about it. We're all authors. You all have your own story, and if you don't like it, you get to change it. And so it is, and that was just one of those things that's like come to my mind. It's like, man, I can't believe that. This is little things that you do that you're not aware of. Because when we put ourselves, trying to be that cool hero parent, especially with little kids, they like to put their parents up on a pedestal. But when we accept that and try to portray that as though we're perfect, remember, our kids, they want to mimic us. But they can't be perfect, and we're not perfect. And so when they get to the point where they realize that they can't mimic us in that perfection, then they start feeling bad about themselves and start feeling shame. And when you have that, they don't like themselves as much, and then they're going to be more apt to act out of that behavior. So it's really important that, we allow our kids to make mistakes and to not judge them when they do make mistakes, so that they can feel comfortable with taking the responsibilities for what they did or what they didn't do. A lot of the uneasiness that comes along with being uncomfortable and making mistakes has a lot to do with self-confidence. It's kind of like building a house. You have to have a solid foundation. Well, a person's self-confidence is part of that solid foundation. So how do we help our kids have a solid foundation? Well, part of it is being aware of the story that we tell ourselves and the story that we tell our kids. And the other cool thing is to be able to talk with our kids and find out the story that they're telling themselves. What's going on in their mind? What are they thinking? Because it's our thoughts that drive our feelings, that drive our actions. And if you can start to communicate with your kids and find out what they're thinking, you have a lot better way of helping them to think in a different fashion so that they are more self-confident and they can grow from that. And as that self-confidence grows, there's a ton of benefits from it. And they're going to be more immune to criticism. They're going to be less likely to be bullied. They're going to be better leaders. And they're also going to be able to grow more because they're going to be okay with making mistakes, because it's not a judgment thing. It's just a part of life, and it's something to learn from. So as part of that decision making and part of how kids behave has a lot to do with the 6 human needs that we all have. The first one is for certainty, to be able to have that comfort, that secure environment, that structure that they need. The other one we have is uncertainty, to be able to have that variety so that we can exercise and challenge ourselves mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. Then there's the need for significance, to be able to feel important, to feel that you're worthy. And of course there's the need for connection or love, which we're all quite familiar with. Then there's the need for growth, to be able to grow physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, because if we're not growing, we're dying. So having that growth is an important need. And the last one is contribution, to be able to be a part of something, and to also be able to go beyond themselves and to give to others. So it's really important that the story we tell ourselves and the story we tell our kids supports these human needs that we all have. Because it's important to remember too that the story that we tell, you're going to be planting seeds. You can plant the seeds of growth, or you can plant the seeds of limitations. For example, recently you all received teacher request forms in your packet. So imagine this situation. You're at home, you're talking to your spouse, or you're talking to one of the other parents, and the kids are around the house, they're all in earshot range. And you start saying, yeah, well so-and-so, she's a terrible math teacher. I don't know how anybody learns from there. Or so-and-so, they're not good at teaching science. Or whatever it is. Well, your kids are hearing all this stuff. So can you imagine the first day of school when they go into that classroom with that teacher, they've already been planted the seeds that it's going to be hard to learn in there. And the teacher may not be a very good teacher, or there's whatever part of the teacher it is. So now they've already have this limitation that they're not supposed to learn. And a lot of times it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? We tell ourselves a story and we limit ourselves, and because we limit ourselves, it becomes true. And that's why it's really important when you have those discussions, and I get it, not everybody gets along with all the teachers, some teachers may be better than others, but just really be aware of when you have those conversations, because again, the kids are like sponges, and they absorb everything, and they may be on the computer, but boy, them ears are like radar dishes. They can pick up on all kinds of stuff. Unless, of course, you're telling them to clean up or something. Then they didn't hear a word you said. The other example I have is, again, with Vikram. Last year, he was, they did some writing classes with poetry and different forms of writing, and everything's all pretty cool. And then towards the end, it was like, here's a blank piece. You guys can do whatever you want. Any type of writing, talk about any type of subject. Just be creative. And boy, he would just shut down. Because the story he was telling himself that he's not creative. I can't do this. And so here comes dear old Dad. He's going to help him with his homework. Well, unfortunately, I was telling myself that same story, that I'm not creative. So between the two of us, it usually wasn't a pretty scene. So I was like, all right, we'll wait till Mommy gets home. Mommy can help you with this part of the homework. But that was the story he was telling, and the story that I was telling myself. And then this past August, I was on a retreat with a bunch of coaches, and part of one of the activities, we were supposed to do some art project, some origami. They're like just bring in some pictures of things that you like to do, or meaning, or words, or phrases, and they're going to show us exactly what to do. I'm like, okay, no big deal. It's just like, do what they tell you, and it's all good. So that morning, I go down to the cottage where they have the art stuff, and we're in there, and one of the other women's like, hey, I thought the thing's supposed to be round. But he's like, oh no, we're not doing that today, because that's a long process, and it'll take like 4 hours, because we do a little, interpretation of what you did. So today what we're going to do, you have a blank slate, and you can do whatever you want. And there's some paint on here, there's some of that gluey stuff, and that, glaze, and over here on the table, there's magazines with all kinds of pictures and words, there's feathers, there's rocks, there's sand, all kinds of stuff. You can go outside and get stuff, do whatever you want, be creative and have fun. I was like, you gotta be kidding. That is not what I wanted at all. So I sat there and I stared at my blank canvas. But then I remembered that conversation I had with Vikram and that experience we had with his writing. And so I dedicated that project to him, because I changed my story. Because I thought about, there are things that I do that are creative. So I told myself, you are creative. And I went ahead and did it, and actually came up with that, which you can't really read too well. But so when I went home with the kids, I shared with the stuff I did, and I pulled Vikram aside, and I told him, I said, hey, I dedicated this to you, because I know you tell yourself that you're not creative. And I know that's not true. I used to do the same thing, tell myself that I wasn't creative. And so it was one of those things where I had the opportunity to change the way I perceive things, and change the way I perceive myself. I was able to change my story. And so ever since then, Chitra and I, we really make a conscious effort when the kids show us something, whether Asha's got her Barbies doing some kind of crazy thing or whatever, or Vikram's doing his Legos or his sketches, we always make sure we use the word creative. They're like, oh wow, that's pretty creative. Man, I love your creativity. So again, we plant that seed of growth so that they believe it. Because what they hear is what they take in, and they believe it. So that was a pretty deep thing to be able to see him, and to be able to be vulnerable enough to share that with him, and to be able to grow. And so it's really important too, as we go through and tell the story to these kids, that we choose our words carefully. Especially when it comes to disciplining. Instead of telling them, you're bad, you're mean, you're rude, tell them, you're acting mean, you're acting rude. Because Vikram tries to bust this one all the time. Oh, you think I'm stupid. You said I'm stupid. No. You're a very smart boy. You're a very kind boy. But you're acting in an inappropriate way. You're acting that way. So then you can actually take it a next step farther, like, what are you thinking that made you act that way? So again, it gets back into figuring out the story that they're telling themselves, what's in their thoughts, so that they can really start being more aware and connecting how their thoughts are going to create what they do and how they act, whether it's appropriately or inappropriately. And it's really great, being involved with the kids as parents, because when we're able to connect with them and engage with them and communicate in such a way that they're able to grow physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, that their self-confidence is going to grow. And their acceptance of who they are, not what they are, but their acceptance of who they are is going to grow. And when that happens, a lot of the inappropriate behavior really decreases. I mean, granted, they're not going to be perfect kids, and we shouldn't expect them to be. But a lot of the behavioral problems that I hear and even witness, stem from something that's missing in a child's life. One or more of those 6 human needs is not getting met. So talking with parents, one of those things that's missing is boundaries. That need for certainty in their life. So to be able to help the kids to create their story, they need that solid foundation. And that solid foundation needs to be based on values and based on boundaries. Because it's, a lot of people think boundaries and they think that, well, I'm trying to control my kid. It's not a matter of controlling them. But if you think of it more in terms of helping them to process information and helping them to be able to process experiences that they have in their life. I recently read that today kids are 100 times more stimulated than just 40 years ago. You got technology, advertisement, society. They're all just bombarding our kids with messages. And unfortunately, not a lot of those messages are ones we would care that they hear. Because if you think about it, like advertising, what's their goal? To make you feel like you're not thin enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not cool enough, you're not this enough, right? They want you to make you feel bad about yourself, so hey, but if you buy my shoes or you drink my drink, now you can be better. Now you're going to be cool. You're going to be feeling a lot better about yourself. But it's all external stuff, because that's what they're trying to sell. And that's why it's important as parents that we work from the inside out, and to be able to help build the children's confidence, just like building a house again. That solid foundation. It's not about the color of the shingles and the paint. It's about the foundation. And that story that we tell them is really going to help them to build their own solid foundation. So with doing that, it's really important that the kids have us as parents, not so much as friends. They really need parents in their life. There's a lot of people that can be friends, but having parents there that are willing to, create those boundaries and create that structure and help them grow together and be on that journey with them is really important. I know a lot of parents, they worry that they're going to drive their kids away because, well, all these other kids, they get to do this and they get to do that. But our kids really need that structure, and they really need that boundary so that they can grow from it. And they will actually help you grow closer together despite the resistance that they put on you, because they're like, well, we don't have to do that. They're not. Why are we? And that's where it's tough for us to be parents is, being strong and being consistent and following through. Because if we go through and this journey with our kids and start taking on the responsibilities, doing their homework, or if they leave their homework at home or something at home, we bring it up to them, and so they don't have to worry about getting upset. When you take somebody else's responsibility, you take away their ability to respond. And so that's where it's important the kids learn at an early age to be able to respond to life. And a lot of times this is where the blame game comes into play. We're trying to protect our kid, so it's the school's fault, it's the teacher's fault, it's the other kid's fault, it's my fault. Always trying to take that responsibility and shield them from it, but what we're really doing is we're taking the power away from them. We're not giving them power, we're actually taking it away. So one of the things that you can actually do is what I call the so what game. They did something, say they left, got on the bus, and you noticed their homework sitting on the counter. So what? So what's really going to happen? Yeah, they might get their stick on the board, they might lose part of recess, they might get very upset and cry. But again, if we think about the big picture, when the kids leave the house, what kind of values, what kind of discipline do we want them to have? What kind of confidence do we want them to have? So it's really part of that whole bigger picture, and just to really not worry about the little things, but start thinking in bigger terms. And if you think about it in terms of telling a story, when you take on their responsibility and don't allow them to be responsible for their actions, the story that you're telling them is, you're not capable to do it yourself. And they buy into that. And that's what leads into a lot of the learned helplessness, because it's like, well, I'm not supposed to be able to do that. And again, it kind of goes back to really supporting them when they do make mistakes. Allow them to have that responsibility. Allow them to make mistakes, but be there for them and help them to grow from that. And back in 2008, a great example of this was, I don't know if you remember, from up in Middletown, the granny robber. This woman stole from, I think, 4 banks to give money to her 30-some-year-old son. And as I was reading more about her, she apparently did this her whole life. If something go wrong, boom, she was quick to jump in and make sure that he didn't have to suffer. And then, you know, so this continued on, and it got to the point where she literally was robbing banks. And she got busted, and she was in jail, and they interviewed her. And one of the things that she said was, I was an enabler, but I didn't see it that way at the time. I thought I was helping him, but I was actually hurting him. And we can relate to that as parents, right? We don't want our kids to struggle. We don't want our kids to suffer. But I was reading a book recently by Richard Rohr called Falling Upward, The Two Halves of Our Spiritual Life. And in there, he's discussed the necessary suffering. The things that, as humans, we need to suffer in order to grow. And he had a cool little saying in there. He's like, when people try to avoid the necessary suffering, they end up suffering unnecessarily. Because if you think about it, picture a scene of mountains and valleys. You got the peaks and valleys. You got this nice scenery. And you look up at the mountaintop. It's usually pretty barren. Not a whole lot going on up there. There might be some snow or something. But as you move down into the valleys, that's when you start seeing the trees, the lush grass, the flowers, the bushes. Because that's where the growth is. And the same thing happens in our lives and our kids' lives. When we're down in the valleys, when we're struggling, that's where the growth opportunities are. And if we can take our perception and our mindset of when we're in those times and actually embrace it, instead of fighting it, but actually embrace it and look for those opportunities that we can grow, and help our kids look for those opportunities that they can grow. And then you're not going to be in the valley as long, and the valley's not going to seem as deep, because now you're looking for something rather than just sitting there and wallowing in self-pity. Woe is me. It's like, it is what it is. I'm here. This may stink. I don't like it, but I'm going to look for what it is that I can learn from this situation. So, a few takeaways from tonight. Again, a story time. Really, from a personal level, think of the stories you're telling yourselves. Will cause you to do things or not to do things in your own life. And be aware of the stories that you're telling your kids by your actions and your words. And whether you're meaning to tell them or not, they're getting that story. And if you don't like your story, you can change it. You can change it by changing your thoughts. By changing your thoughts, it's going to change the way you feel, which is going to change the way you act. The other thing we talked about is boundaries. That need for certainty. Having that solid structure for the kids so that they can grow. And then responsibility. Being able to allow your kids to make mistakes and be responsible for their own actions so that they continue to have the ability to respond. So don't take that power away from them. And the story we want to tell our kids when it comes to responsibility is, you are capable. That's the story they need to hear. As I mentioned earlier, I was going to give you some tools that you can use. And one of them is, allow your kids to be a part of the decision-making process. Ask them questions like, so what do you think about this? Or how do you feel about that? Especially the feeling part with boys. That's a lot of things with the emotional intelligence where, just due to society and things, getting in touch with your feelings is very important. But even if it's a matter of coming up with a game plan to clean the house, or whatever, it's vacation or dinner, whatever it is, get their input. Because when you do that, you're going to get more buy-in from them, because they were part of the plan. And also think about how it's going to affect them from a self-confidence standpoint. Now they're going to feel significant, because you took the time and asked them what they think about stuff. What would they like to see happen? And again, you're the parent. That doesn't mean they get whatever they want, or even discipline sometimes. Hey, you know you're not supposed to kick your sister. What do you think is an appropriate punishment? And again, just allowing them to be there and be a part of that can have a lot of really good results for you. The other one, and Sister Ann actually mentioned this a little bit in the e-folder yesterday, you know, with Lent right around the corner, I like to call it a digital detox. You know, with all the technology going on in the house, spend however many hours you want, whether it's hours a day or hours a week, no TV, no phone, no iPad, no computer, none of that stuff. And just spend some time together as a family. Play a game. Or one of the cool things is called table topics. We do a Toastmaster. So you just pick up a topic. They can pick one out of a hat. And maybe, you know, what's the funniest thing you saw on TV? What happened to you that you really enjoyed today? Any type of thing to get conversation going. And it really helps the kids feel more part of the family and the family to grow together. And just really getting away from all the electronic stuff. And the other thing too is alone time. There are a lot of adults and a lot of kids that really are uncomfortable being by themselves in the quiet. As Matthew Kelly calls it, spending some time in the classroom of silence. Because in order to do that, you have to be comfortable with who you are. And so it can be a little bit uncomfortable. But again, if you allow them to have those experiences and take away the distractions, it will really help them to grow. The other one I want to talk about is acknowledge and validate. And what I refer to as acknowledging is a deeper level of reflecting back or paraphrasing what they say. And there's several things that happen when you do this. One, they're going to know you listened. And when you do that, that makes them feel significant, and it makes them feel that you care. And one of the other cool things that allows you, what happens when you do that is they get to hear their words coming out of somebody else's mouth. And there's a lot of times what's up here and what comes out here isn't the same thing. And so they keep saying like, no, that's not what I meant, or that's not what I said. Then they can start thinking that, okay, I need to start explaining myself, and maybe have to take the time to think so that what I say is really what I mean. And if you're having an argument or a friendly discussion, and you do this, now you're talking about the same thing. So if your son says one thing and you hear another and you're arguing about it, you're never going to come to agreement because you're not on the same page. So right from the get-go, by acknowledging that's what they're saying, you're going to be on the same page. You may not agree, but at least you're discussing the same topic. So in order to do that, there's a couple phrases you can do. So basically it's like, so if I understand you correctly, and then you just kind of paraphrase what they said or summarize it. Or, what you're telling me is, or in other words, so basically any type of phrase that they get the message of, hey, this is what I heard. And then you can kind of go from there. And also, again, they're going to feel a lot better, and the guard's going to be down because you understood them. And you get where they're at. The second part of that is to validate. And to validate, what you're doing is you're telling them that they have the right to feel the way they do. So you're validating their emotions. So it's not a matter of judging them as whether they're right or wrong, whether you agree or disagree. It has nothing to do with that. You're just letting them know that, hey, I get that you feel this way. And again, it's really helpful for them to put down the guard because now they know you get it. So in order to do that, you could use phrases like, it's perfectly normal you feel that way. So again, they just feel normalized. Or, it's understandable you're disappointed because you spent a lot of time studying and didn't get the grade you hoped for. So here, you're validating. It's understandable you're disappointed. And you acknowledge that they studied hard and they didn't get the grade they'd hoped for. Or, again, if you feel you've been hurt and you're angry, it's no wonder you feel resentment. So again, you acknowledge that they're hurt and angry, And then you validate that, yeah, no wonder you feel resentment. And the cool part is, once you get to that point, obviously we don't want to leave them in anger. We don't want to leave them with resentment in their heart. But once you win their heart by telling them, I get where you're at. This is where you're at. I understand you feel that way. Now the defenses come down. And now you can start using that to move forward. So I had a client who shared with me the one time that she did this with her son. She had signed him up for some select soccer team she thought he would enjoy. And apparently the coach yelled and screamed all the time, and her son complained every single time before he went to practice. And then finally one day she's like, wow, no wonder you don't want to go to practice. If he sits there and yells and screams at you like a drill sergeant, that would stink. She said that was it. He just needed her to understand how he felt. And he didn't have that need to keep complaining to her because she got it. She understood where he was at. So like with any tools and stuff, it's really important to be consistent and to be patient. I know we live in a quick fix-it society. They can fix anything with an infomercial. Within 28 days it's fixed. But if you think of it, as more a part of the journey, and it's a continual growth process. It's kind of like the bamboo tree. It grows for 5 years underground before we see any growth above ground. So it's the same thing with our kids, to kind of keep that in the back of your mind that, I'm doing these things, I'm trying these things, but I'm not seeing it right away. Well, it takes a while for it to sink into them and to really get those roots deeply planted in them. And just the other day I found this little quote on listening that I'll share with you since you can't read it anyhow. Never to get rid of the conversation. What do you expect for nothing? The problem is not in your set, it's your eyes. It says, listen earnestly to anything your children tell you, no matter what. If you don't listen eagerly to the little stuff when they're little, they won't tell you the big stuff when they're big. Because to them, all of it has always been big stuff. So, and again, we try to get our kids past feeling bad or whatever and just trying to, make it so, it's not such a big deal, but just kind of remember it is a big deal to them. And to acknowledge and validate that so that you can get them at a point where they're more apt to move forward. So the next thing we want to do, Jeannie, if you want to pass those out, please. Is as part of continuing from this, there's a couple opportunities for you to move forward. And what we had come up with is a small groups where Jeannie and I will facilitate, and you can actually work on things that are specific concerns that you have or questions that you have in a more, closely related, so it's more focused on your initial needs. So on February 19th or 20th, you can pick one of those days. So if you're interested in that, just check that box and have your name and email address. And if you would, list some of the topics that you want to hear more about, so that we can kind of group parents together that have similar concerns, so that we can really focus that on for that small group. The other option on there is, I'm not interested in the small group, but I would like to receive Ron's video training series, Stop Tantrums in Their Tracks. 3 simple strategies to get your kids quit acting out.
In 28 days.
What's that?
That'll be fixed in 28 days.
Oh, yeah.
Be consistent and patient.
Yeah. So again, this is the video series that I put together. I put together last summer, and so again, it's just a matter of some more tools and some more awareness that you can use with your kids. Or at the bottom, if neither of those are an option, that's fine as well. The second page that Jeannie passed out is feedback. And Sister Ann mentioned this is the first time we're doing this. And we want this to grow, and we want it to get better. And in order for that to happen, we need your input. And by giving us this feedback, we can continue to make this program grow and get better. So at your leisure, if you would, take some time to fill those out. We would greatly appreciate that.
I have a question, Ron.
Yes.
I don't mean to interrupt,
Are you
but
fine?
when you check either the first box or the second box, if you're interested in the first box, but you also are interested in the videos,
Yeah, you just check them
are
both.
the videos being covered in the small groups, or?
No, because the small groups are going to be what's specific to you. There may be some of that that's in them, but you know, and that's where it helps, where we know what specific topics you want to talk about. That way we can focus on that.
Okay, so you could do the first box.
Yeah, you can do the first and the second one as well. Yeah. So before we get into the question and answer period, Jeannie or Sister Ann, do you have anything else you would like to add?
I don't, Jeannie, do you?
No, I think it's really commendable that you've all come here, because we know how busy things are right now, and I think when you go to a workshop of any kind, even if you learn one thing, it's worth your while. But I'm just so impressed with how many different, very specific, helpful things that Ron has shared with you tonight, that I hope that, and I love this handout because it really asks you to kind of review what he's offered to you and really figure out what of that stuff really is going to resonate with you and be specific to you. And the only other thing is, I'll say, on the subsequent meetings that we have, we will just be talking about what is going on with you in your situation specific to your household, and we'll talk together about what things can make it better. Different and better are two key words that we'll be working on. So if you keep on doing what you're doing, you'll keep on getting what you've got, and that's great if you've got what you want. But if you don't have what you want, then we have to think of the words different and better. Back to Ron.
Well, I would want to say just one thing. This is just the beginning, you know, we can continue meeting. It's really up to what this group wants. And because we're gonna, like I said, move on like to the intermediate grades, but we still are committed to this group too. So you guys are kind of pioneers wherever we go with this.
Thanks for taking time to watch this presentation. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact Sister Ann, Jeannie Brewer, or myself. Thanks. Have a great day.